Welcome, guys. This morning we are going to be talking about how to demand your freedom, and we're going to be doing a book review. Excited to get into that, but first I wanted to just mention, if you like what you're hearing, if you like the podcast or the Facebook Live, just comment, like it, share it, make sure this message gets out to as many people as possible. And then definitely in the show notes here, we're going to have a link to my podcast if it's easier for you to listen to this on a podcast rather than on Facebook Live. I've had some requests to do a podcast, so I've started a podcast. The name of that podcast is Fueling Your Legacy, and that podcast is going to be on most of your major podcast apps, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, Stitcher, Beaker, just a ton of them there. Hasn't quite made it up to Apple Podcasts yet, but we're working on it. But definitely go ahead, leave a like, review it. That way we can get more engagement in that area. But today we want to talk about how do we demand our freedom and what does that look like? Yet on Monday we discussed in the video and podcast what type of slave are we? What are we a slave to? And most of us, what I've found, we're a slave to our habits. That's ultimately what it comes down to, is we are slaves to our habits. And so how are we overcoming those habits, and what are we doing on a daily basis to overcome those habits? The biggest thing that I've seen in an effort to actually accomplish that is being aware of what those habits are, how they're formed, and how do we actually change them. And there's a lot of different information out there about what the time length it takes to change a habit. I was listening to a podcast, one of Lewis Howes' podcasts a few days ago, and the guest that he had on, I forget his name, but he had mentioned you don't really, if you're going and approaching how long does it take to change a habit from the mindset of how long, then you have already failed. The reality is, if you actually want to change a habit, it has to be a lifestyle change, and that you have to change forever. I mean, if you ever stop doing that change, then you didn't effectively change it. And so that's kind of a false notion. I would say it changes in an instant, and then you have to continue to just keep doing it. And that's what I've learned about habits, not just from that person, but from a lot of other people and books that I've read. Today, the book review is going to be on literally one of my favorite books, probably in the top 2 or 3 of all of my reading list, and that is Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. If you haven't read it, I strongly encourage you to grab this book. You can get it on Audible, you can get it on Barnes & Noble, you can buy it on Amazon, whatever works best for you. But definitely go ahead and get this book. This is maybe if you've ever read his book, Think and Grow Rich, this is really a precursor to, it's actually happened after the Think and Grow Rich book. However, it really goes into a lot more depth about what the actual definite of purpose means, how to establish that, and how to actually procure that and make sure that it's actively working in your life. The story and little history of this book, I think it's important for people to understand from a perspective of why is this so critical for us to have and learn from. Napoleon Hill, he had just finished writing Think and Grow Rich. He was fairly successful in his career, but then everything just came crashing down on him, and he found himself on the run. People were trying to kill him. He was literally a fugitive from these people, and he was hiding in people's basements, trying to just stay as safe as possible, had to move states. During this process, he just got very, very low, down on himself, and he had his voice. If you're familiar with his writings, he often talks about this voice, his other self that he has, what starts telling him what to do and kind of directing him on his path. The cool thing about this is that this voice says, okay, now is your test. You've just written a 20 years real study of how people think and grow rich, and now you have to go put it into action. You can't just say stuff. You actually have to prove that this works. And it was really a test for him, but in the process of that, he's hitting his lowest time in his life, and he somehow creates, and I'm not going to spoil it for you, but he gets in conversation with the devil, right? You've heard of visions, you've heard of things. In his mind, he calls them his imaginary meetings that he's had with people, but they became very real for him, and for a time, he chose not to talk about it because he was kind of embarrassed and people would laugh at him, but the reality is these are very real experiences for him. Well, what's cool about that is during this book, there comes a point in time where he's asking these questions of the devil. Now, the devil in this book does not have the option to not answer. He's required to answer all of the questions that Napoleon Hill asks of him, whether or not he wants to. And that's the cool thing, that we're getting this real life, if nothing else, an imaginary conversation. But I venture to say it's more real than fake. But in this conversation, the devil is giving this information, and they get into some really dicey topics that most people are not going to accept this information on, like politics, religion, how effective public schools are and what they're teaching our children, faith, health. I mean, he just really goes down the whole list of all these somewhat taboo topics, and he's asking these questions of the devil, and the devil's responding, explaining to him how he captivates people and how he keeps them bound to his will rather than allowing them to be free agents, right? And that's, we have to learn, how do we demand our freedom? How do we break from this slavery and demand our freedom? Well, there comes a point that the devil says, I dare you to actually publish this book. Now, this book was written first in like 1937, somewhere around there. But because of the information that is in the book, the devil dared Napoleon Hill to actually publish it. He said, if you did, you will be an outcast. You'll basically be crucified socially and financially. You'll have no more future. And as a result of that, Napoleon Hill, his wife, none of them wanted to publish it. They both died. The daughter still did not want to publish it. So this book was not published till about 70 years after it was originally written, because of the controversial information that's in the book. So that kind of tells you, hey, you should really want to read this to find out what is being said. I love mysteries. I love finding out what's in them and how they work and how they apply to my life. And this is definitely one of them that was just right on point. But to deep dive into the book and what we learned mostly from it, there is a term that is, first time I've ever heard it was in this book, and it's called hypnotic rhythm, right? We've all heard of hypnosis or people being hypnotized and what that looks like. Well, in this book, the devil and Napoleon Hill, they're having this discussion, and they really go into depth about what that looks like. And I find that it's something that we can all relate to. We all start habits and we think, hey, these habits are just normal, they're okay, and we're moving along in these habits. But eventually, if something jars us off of our habit, if we kind of get messed up in our habit, then we feel really out of place. We feel like, oh, what just happened in my life? And we don't really know what's going on in our life. And so to really break free of hypnotic rhythm, we have to be intentionally choosing our life rather than just allowing our life to go as the way it goes, just flows like water, right? If we don't intentionally choose our actions, we're just going to be reacting to the actions of others, reacting to our circumstances. And that becomes this hypnotic rhythm where it becomes really difficult to actually break free and get into our own purpose, our own passion, and really express who we are and what we want to accomplish. And that is true freedom, is when we're in control of our mind, our body, our emotions, everything, okay? And so hypnotic rhythm is huge in this thing. He also introduced the term drifting. And in context of drifting, he's basically saying anybody who's in the hypnotic rhythm of their life, they're basically on autopilot, right? We've all had that experience where we know we have to go to work, we put on our shoes, get dressed, we walk out the door, and many of us don't really remember the time between walking out the door and showing up at work. Yet what happened? We walked out to our car, we got in our car, we started it, we put on our seatbelt, hopefully, we drove to where we were driving. Many of us probably plugged in our phones, whatever happened, and we're so hypnotized to the regular mundane cycle of what we have to do every day that it's just happening, right? And that's where we get the term hypnotic rhythm and then drifting. We aren't intentionally living each of those moments. They're just there. They're just happening, right? How many of us have actually shown up to work and worked a full day and came home, and then our spouse says, hey, how was your day? What happened? And we're just like, I don't actually know. Nothing happened today. Nothing of noteworthy happened today because we just were hypnotized the whole day. We did our work. We went home. And then if we're not careful, we're going to be hypnotized through our whole relationship with our spouses, with our children, with our family. We need to be conscious about what we're doing, or we're not really going to get that full fulfillment. So I'm going to read a few of the quotes from the book here because I think it's extremely valuable for people to see kind of what what type of things he was talking about, and hopefully give you a little bit of teaser so you'll actually go out and read the full book for yourself, because I cannot do it justice in the short time that I have. But he does talk about, kind of as a description of drifting, he says, I cause people to drift on every subject through which I can control independent thought and action. So if we're not intentionally controlling our thoughts and actions, then in this book, right, he's saying he is controlling those thoughts and actions. When it comes to marriage, this is something he says. He says, I cause married people to bicker and nag one another over money matters. I cause them to quarrel over the begging and bringing up of their children. I keep them busy finding fault with one another, so they have no time to do anything else long enough. We definitely don't want them breaking a habit. And then this is again, he says, if we can keep them from thinking of themselves or for themselves, and we're winning. And so he says, I cause people to allow me to do their thinking for them because they're too lazy or too indifferent to think for themselves. And I would say, how many of us have sat down in front of the TV and we're going to turn on Netflix or a movie or something, and we go there not even knowing what we want to do, knowing what we want to watch, knowing what we want to listen to, knowing what we want to read, and we're just hoping something pops out to us, right? That's the ultimate form of hypnotic rhythm. We're just showing up to this thing. We're going to worship our TV in an effort just to like lull ourselves into the fact that we don't want to think about what we could be doing. We don't want to think about how could we make more money. We don't want to think about how could we have a better relationship with our family. We aren't thinking about that. We're just sitting down trying to numb our mind so we can go to sleep that night and go back and do it all the next day. And so it's just happening every day to so many people. And it's kind of sad, but it also helps us to, when we hear about these things, we recognize, okay, well, what's our intention? Now, I'm a man of faith, and I believe that we have a God out there and that he wants us to become like him. And I tend to read scriptures and things. And one of the things it says in the Bible is that if you're lukewarm, then God will just spit you out, right? He wants people who have decided something. He doesn't care. I'm not saying he doesn't care, but if you're lukewarm, if you're not moving, he can't even guide you. If you're going in one direction or another, at least he can guide you, though. And so the devil, this is coming from the devil, says, the second, the drifter cannot get help from my opposition because the opposition is not attracted to anything so soft, right? If you're just kind of lukewarm, then God can't help you, right? If you're not intentionally acting and choosing, then God can't help you. And that's where Satan is able to, or Satan, I don't know if that's a great word. We'll say the devil in context of the book. He's able to come in and start controlling your habits. And this is another thing we have to think about as far as how can we actually fulfill this, right? And you can tell who's a drifter and who's not a drifter. And he says, a life that is lived with fullness of peace of mind, contentment, and happiness always divests itself of anything that it does not want. Yet, anyone who submits to annoyances by things he does not want is not definite. Thus, he is a drifter, right? So if you're thinking, okay, well, I have some things in my life that I don't necessarily enjoy, that I don't want to continue in my life, but it's whatever. I'm not willing to change it right now. I can handle this annoyance. I can handle whatever. Then you're just drifting through that experience rather than being intentional about it. If there was something that you really, and you had a definite purpose, and whatever that situation is, it's not serving you, it's not helping you reach your ultimate goal, your ultimate destination, then if you're not getting rid of that out of your life, then you're just drifting through that experience. If you do choose to actually remove that situation from your life, then that might help you. So for instance, right, health becomes a big issue. If we're not eating healthily, then we're not able to perform everything that we need to do. And as a result, then we are not going to get the health and the wellness. We're not going to have the energy to do what we need to do. Let me just find this here. But when he's talking about health, he specifically talks about how he gets people to eat food that's not good for them, and thus they don't have the energy to continue to do it and fulfill their purpose. And as a result, they just keep drifting. And so health is such a big, important thing in our lives. And so many of us, we just take it casually. I can say for myself, I love myself some good pizza. right? I eat pizza not too often, but I always crave it because pizza is like my weakness. And the more greasy, the more unhealthy the pizza, the better in my mind. But that doesn't mean that it actually is good for me. In fact, it's not. Every time I eat it, the next day I wake up feeling sluggish. I feel sick. My bowels are not feeling great. Everything is not great inside of me. And yet I still do it because sometimes I like to eat pizza. But if I was more intentional about my efforts, then I would probably swear off pizza altogether. I've done a pretty good job at limiting the amount of pizza that I bring into my life, but I still enjoy it occasionally. But when it comes to religion, this is the next section that I want to touch on here in his book, and prayer specifically. Prayer is such an interesting thing when you look at cross religion and see what people in different religions are actually, how they pray, what their prayers look like, what that looks like as far as meditation versus asking versus expressing gratitude. There's so many different ways to pray. And so he touches on prayer and what prayer is from a mechanical standpoint, right? He says, a person goes to prayer with definite purpose and faith in the attainment of that purpose, puts into motion the laws of nature that transmutes one's dominating desires into their physical equivalent. That is all there is to prayer, right? We can do that in a multi different ways, and that's what I've kind of mentioned. Now, you know when somebody doesn't know how to pray, though, and you know when they're a drifter. If you're listening to somebody's prayer, and I'm not saying you should go call them out and say, hey, I can see that you're drifting, but maybe invite them to read this book. That might be a good choice for them. When you hear a person praying for something that he should procure through his own efforts, you may be sure that you're listening to a drifter, right? I've done that. I've been guilty of that. I say, hey, please help somebody come talk to me. I just want somebody to come visit me, or please help somebody else to think about me. Please help the dinner to be made when I get home, or whatever. There's so many things that I probably should be doing myself. But I'm just sitting here wishing, hoping that somebody else will do it for me. And that is just not how the universe works. That's not how God or anybody else in my life works. It's important for us to actually go and do the work, and then we'll ultimately have what we can achieve, and we'll get the help from the universe or God or infinite intelligence, whatever you want to label that. And so one of the things a few of the things that I've changed in my life from reading this book, I want to touch on that, is I've been extremely more conscious of my thoughts, right? When I'm doing something, I'm thinking, hey, is this just a habitual thing, or does it have intention? Now I check in with myself. I try to check in once an hour, sometimes once every other hour, to say, hey, what I'm doing right now, is this helping me get to my ultimate purpose, or is it not? And if it's not, then I get up, I change my activity, and I go do something that in that moment sounds more effective to help me get to my ultimate purpose. It's good to have those little course corrections, just like a plane when they're flying. They have a compass or a GPS, something to constantly recorrect their course, because if they didn't and they were just 1 degree off, they could end up in an entirely different place than where they were trying to go. And so the constant course correction is absolutely essential, not just for driving and for flying, boating, things like that, but it's absolutely important for our lives. For that to even be effective, though, you have to know what you want. You have to know where you're trying to get to. And that's what I found to be the main thing for me, is identifying where I actually want to get to and how it's going to help me. The other thing that I've seen in my life is that I've actually created a daily structure for myself, because to a level, we're all going to be in hypnotic rhythm. And so the question is, to a degree, how much of that hypnotic rhythm do we want to succumb to? Or I don't know if succumb is the right word, but do we want to intentionally place in there, right? So for me, I try and have my morning routine absolutely the same, non-negotiable, so we can make sure that every day it's going to happen the same. That way I can make that part of my day. I can always start my day great. It's been counseled or mentored from people to me that my evening needs to be the same. I need to always be having my nighttime be the same thing every day so that I'm in the same place. I can control what state I'm in. And if I can control the state that I'm in emotionally, mentally, physically, then I'm better able to accomplish my goals and what I need to accomplish that day. And so those are two areas of your life, the morning and the evening, that I think it'd be a good idea to start and creating a rhythm, creating something that you want to see. You'll hear often with the sports announcers, these sports announcers will be talking about how these extremely good athletes, sometimes they have an off night, sometimes they have an on night. And when they're really, really killing it, then you'll hear the announcer say, man, that person is in rhythm, right? And that's because they've aligned their desire with their rhythm, and now they're perfectly in sync and in rhythm. And if your dominant desire is not in alignment with your efforts, then you're out of sync, you're out of rhythm. And so how do we get ourselves into rhythm and into a rhythm that we choose, thus demanding our freedom because we're demanding it from the rhythm of our choice, rather than allowing somebody else to create our rhythm for us, and thus we become slaves to somebody else's rhythm, or to, in this book's the devil's rhythm, right? It's so important to intentionally create our life rather than just let life happen to us. The nice thing about that is then from an individual standpoint, right? Depression, anxiety, a lot of this stuff just leaves because we're living in the present a lot more, and everything that happens in our life, good, bad, the ugly, everything, it happens for us, right? We recognize, hey, this is ultimately going to help us get to our end destination. And we start looking at things from a state of gratitude, and as if this is going to benefit us, rather than looking at it from a whining, oh, this happened to me. Well, the very statement of this happened to me is removing accountability from yourself, removing a responsibility from yourself, and then driving yourself deeper into the rhythm of reaction rather than action. And so hopefully that was helpful today. I love this book. It's honestly, I read it probably once every 3 months, along with the other books that I read, just because I always want to make sure that I'm improving. There's so much in here. There's no way I could possibly apply it all the first time I read it, and I know you guys will find the same thing. So get this book, definitely download it, read it, however you like to consume content. Definitely do it that way. And you can also check out my podcast. You're going to be seeing some interviews, some other shorter podcasts about different topics about building your legacy. Again, going back to this, you have to intentionally create what you want. You cannot just passively sit by and let things happen to you. So again, rank, review, and comment on the video on YouTube, as well as on Facebook and on my podcast. Thanks a bunch. Have a great day.